When I was a boy, I would always be taking care of my father's goats. I would always have to move them to a different area so they can feed on fresh greens. This happened on a Tuesday after school on a cloudy and dark day. My father insisted that I bring the goats further into the forest behind our house and tie them under a tree as he believed it was going to rain that night. Usually, I would move the goats in the morning early, but this could not wait that long. I took the goats and moved deep into the bushes behind my house. I found a large tree and tied the rope around the branches that were low. By the time I was done, the rain had begun showering down heavily, and I felt the urge to take a pee. I went by a nearby tree and began to relieve myself when I noticed two eyes staring at me from a distance of about 25 feet. The eyes belonged to a man who seemed to be 6 feet tall. I was surprised as I was not expecting anyone to be this far into the bushes. I started to focus on this strange man. I realized that he was only wearing his underwear. He was skinny and also very dark, like he was covered in mud or tar of some sort. I finished doing my business right there and then and started to back up while looking at this complete stranger when he made a step in my direction. I turned and I cut, as we Jamaicans say. I ran all the way back to my house, never looking back until I was home, but I did not see him at all. That night, I could not sleep because I was worried about the goats, and I didn't tell my father because he more than likely would not have believed me. Later that night, about 3 a.m., I heard the sound of a goat outside my window. As I had mentioned before, I could not sleep. The noise sounded like a goat, but after listening for a while I realized it sounded more like someone trying to mimic the sound of a goat. I decided to go by my window as there was a small opening through the wood that I could peep through. I gasped when I realized that it was the same man that I had encountered that day. He was now on the outside of my backyard, making goat sounds, maybe to lure me or someone on the outside. I continued to watch as he paced back and forth, making the same sounds. Then he suddenly turned and walked away in silence. As soon as my father was up in the morning, I told him everything that happened, and he grabbed his machete and we both ran into the bushes where the goats were. All the goats were there and appeared to be okay. My father continued to look around and even went further a bit into the forest, looking to see if he could find anything. But whoever that man was, he was gone, and I never saw him again. Let's just say it took me a very long time to go back into the bushes that far behind my house. This is the story my grandfather told me a long time ago. My grandfather was in his 20s in the 1950s. I used to go by the river every day to bathe in the evening after I came from the farm. There were less people there, and I always went to the deep parts where few people went. That is how I preferred it. I would at times stay into the night long after everyone had gone. One night, while I was making my leave, I heard a woman singing. She had the most beautiful opera sounding voice I had ever heard. The voice sounded like it was coming from around the corner, and I made my way to see who this woman was. When I finally saw her, she was laying on her side with her elbow supporting her upper body on a very large rock, and she was naked. Her back was turned to me, but I could tell that her skin was beautiful as the moonlight reflected off her. Her hair was dark and puffy and spread out like tree branches. I started to look around to see where she had left her clothes or to see if anyone was with her, and saw nothing, but when I looked back in her direction, she was gone, and the singing stopped. I looked around to see where she could have turned, but saw her nowhere. I was even looking to see if she was in the water near the rock where she sat, but there was no movement in the water. I looked around a bit more and left not knowing what to make of what I saw. It could have simply been my mind playing tricks on me. I went back every day after, but saw nothing or heard nothing, and soon the whole experience began to fade. When about 3 months later, and another night of staying longer after everyone had gone, I heard the same voice singing even more beautifully this time. I quickly but silently moved in the direction and saw her this time standing on the same large rock with her back turned and looking up, singing at the moon. I could see her curvaceous figure this time, and as before, naked as the day she was born. I stood there watching, captivated by her singing, not making a sound, just listening. She suddenly turned and looked at what I believed to be me, and jumped immediately into the water and swam down. I ran into the water and went about waist deep, as where she had jumped was very deep and she might have gotten in trouble. But I could not see her, and she never emerged from the water, and after a while I started to believe that it must have been my mind playing tricks on me again. And with that, I left. The next day came, and as soon as I was done, I was leaving, and I heard her again. This time, even more beautiful than ever before. I rushed towards her, not even trying to stay quiet, but just wanting to see her before she left. This time, she was on the same rock, but she was facing me, and she was the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. She was looking at me and then jumped into the water. She came up this time and came towards me and only stopped when the water was right under her breast. She started to sing and motioned for me to come join her, and I was more than happy to. As I walked towards her and the water reached above my knees, about 3 feet from where she was, I noticed, even with just a little moonlight, that she had black eyes with no white. I stopped, and when she saw that I had stopped, she continued to sing even louder, and she reached out her hand towards me. But I was beginning to become more terrified while looking at her eyes. That is when she leaped at me, and I turned and ran as fast as I could out of the water and onto the banks of the river. I looked back and she was running after me, but her tongue was out. Her tongue was about 10 inches out of her mouth, and she had spiky teeth. I ran to the path leading away from the river to the road. I ran straight home, all the time while hearing footsteps behind me. When I reached home, I looked back and saw no one. I was just in my underwear, so you could imagine my folks wanted to know what had happened, but I was so terrified I could not speak right away. I told my folks what happened, but they thought I was just imagining things. My grandfather, who was in his 90s at the time, told me that same night that he had a friend who visited a woman by the river every night, but one day he disappeared. No one ever saw him again. My grandfather, he never returned to the river by himself, nor did he ever stay late. This is the story he had told me. My grandfather doesn't believe in the paranormal, but this was his experience. He said he believed what he encountered was what we Jamaicans call a river mama, or better known by the world as a mermaid, but this one had no tail. This happened about 2 days ago. It hasn't left my mind, and I am even more paranoid. I figured telling my story would somehow help me get over it. It's New Year's Day, and making trips back and forth in the community I'd rather not say the name of. I had finished letting off the last passenger and was looking to head back in town when I saw a lady, rather a young woman. She saw my taxi and signaled to me to make a stop. Nothing out of the ordinary. That is how it has always been. I noticed while she was walking towards my car how attractive she was and how old school she dressed in her short. To be honest, I would expect a woman like this to be driven anywhere she wants, or even to have her own vehicle to go anywhere she wants instead of taking a cab. She entered in my back seat, though the front was clearly available, but I thought nothing of it. I asked her if she was going into the town. She responded, "No, up the road in this same community. I'm going to Peyton Avenue." I was a bit lost until I remembered there was actually a street by that name, but I have only ever been there once, and it was just to see what was there. There was only an old rundown abandoned villa and a dead-end road right after it. I expressed this to her and asked her if she was sure that that was the name of the street which she wanted to go. She replied that the property was bought and has recently been renovated. I thought to myself, I don't remember anyone mentioning that this was the case, but given the rarity of transit on that route, she may be right. So I headed in the direction, going all the way up the hill and on the back roads. I decided that we could have a little convo on the way, and I asked, "How long has it been since the renovation of the villa?" And she replied, "A little before the Christmas holidays." She said that when I see the villa, I would love how it looks, and whenever there's a party event, she would invite me. I told her that would be nice. At this point, I turned onto Peyton Avenue, and after 30 seconds, and some more chit chat. I saw the villa in a distance. She was right. It was renovated, like new, and was looking very good. The paint looked new, the grass was cut, and the bushes was trimmed to perfection, and the gates were on their hinges. The windows weren't broken, and all the fixtures looked new, and rust on the bars were gone. This was a total opposite of what I had seen the first time I went to Peyton Avenue. She asked me what I thought, and I said, "It looks good, man." She then asked, "How much was the fare?" And that is when I noticed some parked vehicles in the yard. They all looked from the 1980s, but clean and like they were purchased recently. But these are old vehicles, I thought to myself. The owner must really love these vehicles to keep them up. I told her the fare while still looking at the villa. I noticed that she was not responding, so I turned to see her, and there was no one in the back of the seat, and I did not hear the doors open. I looked outside to see if she was there, but she was nowhere to be found. I looked to see if she was in the yard of the villa, but this is where I lost my mind and nearly wet myself up. The villa was the same rundown old structure that I had seen at the very first, with its bushes and grass overgrown, and rusty gates and iron bars with stripping paint. None of the vehicles that looked like they came from out of the 80s were there anymore. I put the car in reverse and I turned around, pressed the gas pedal to the floor, and cut out of there until I reached back to civilization, or maybe to modern times. Now, every passenger that comes in my car, I look them straight in their eyes first. And whenever they make a request to go somewhere near Peyton Avenue, I start to pray, do God, do God, do God.